This is the District 2 Sports Podcast with your hosts, Gregory, Devin, and Big G, your voice for local sports in Southern Virginia. You can listen to this episode and hundreds of others on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
They're not in my top 12. They're not in my top 12. I told y'all. They're not.
Big G got his teams in and they all lost last week. So,
how did you get that? I got two teams in and one of them lost.
I need to throw one more shout out. I got a shout out to my little guy over there on the left, little Dev.
The spreadsheet is back out, and it's back.
Oh, you have one for basketball?
I got one for basketball.
Yes.
Really? You're not for Spurs? Okay. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Whoa,
So now
man,
we're going hot now. It's going hot.
For anybody listening tonight, anybody paying attention, if y'all don't know, the mob is in the NFL.
Not a fan? Not a fan of the lo-fi?
That music was atrocious.
That was weak. I did not.
That was the first thing I wrote down. As soon as it started, I put, not crazy about this.
All right, so this is Two Sports Podcast, and we're back with another episode today. Today, we have the pleasure of joining Chris Mooney, the head coach of the Richmond Spiders men's basketball team. Coach, thank you so much for coming on today. How have you been doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thank you guys for having me.
Well, Coach, we can't thank you enough. Like I said, we're in the D1 level now. We've talked a lot of D2, D3 coaches over the years, and so it's kind of it's going to be a fun one today. The first question I have for you, though, is like at a time of coaches leaving colleges for better positions and whatnot, but you've been at Richmond for, 20 years now. What's kept you around the Richmond area, whether it's been the players or just the admin there? What's kept you around for so long?
Yeah, well, I feel like, when I came to Richmond, I didn't necessarily know what would be, what would follow the next few years or next steps. And to be honest with you, Richmond is just a great place. It's a great place for basketball. It's a great place to raise a family. We have two boys. I feel like it's almost a little bit of a gift to them to have them be able to stay in one spot and only have attended, one school and have the friendships that they've had. So I do like that part of it. And then, beyond that, Richmond's very committed to basketball. I think they're committed to playing and being successful in a certain way. I think they're committed to attracting really, really good student athletes. And I think that has always matched well with how we're trying to run the program. And I felt like, and Richmond's felt like it's been a great fit. So it's still very exciting to come in and we have just loved every minute that we've been in Richmond.
Coach, when you started, or you were a four-year player there at Princeton, you got into coaching right after you graduated there. I think you did some high school work and then I think Beaver, then Air Force as well. Did you ever foresee yourself, going this kind of arc where you're at Richmond for 20 years? Or were you thinking, hey, I'm going to continue on to an upper level, program or something like that?
Yeah, I think that I would have had a lot more, when you're young and you're trying to move up. I was a high school coach at a place called Lansdale Catholic High School, which was a great place for 3 years. And I think that, I wanted to make sure that the next move I made would be to college, and I did that at Division III and then Division I. So yeah, I think when you're that age, you're thinking about moving up and how you have the best prospects of a great career, winning teams, those kinds of things. Then I think when I got to Richmond and we turned things around here and did well, I was also more aware of how college athletics work and what goes on in certain places and how it works. Not necessarily good or bad, but just much more of an awareness and the opportunity to be here where I had a really good understanding of the school, the values of the school, the mission of the school, the commitment level of the school. I feel like that was really, I was at that age, then I could understand that. And with the opportunity to stay was really, really appealing to me. So I think, when I was a younger coach, I think I would have been able to say, hey, 4 years here, 3 years there. But as you get older and you start to see a little bit more clearly and obviously your life starts to be a little bit different, I think I really recognize the value of being here.
Coach, I'm going to throw a couple questions at you because my internet is limited where I'm at right this second. But, I go back to, I'm a few years older than you, just to let you know right off the get-go. So I don't mind aging myself. But, at the time, there was a big game in 1989 between a Princeton Tiger group and a Georgetown group that went like 50-49. Georgetown had to pull it out. Was that the ulterior motive, or was that the biggest thing that pushed you towards Princeton at the time?
Well, what a great question. So I was a junior in high school on that game, and I had been, I started to be recruited my junior year, and yeah, I can remember that game. I think the game was on St. Patty's Day, and so I remember watching the game from Providence, and yeah, I mean, just fell in love with, if you remember, Georgetown was the number 1 overall seed, and they had just, blitzed through the Big East tournament. And so for Princeton to be, winning that game for a good portion of it, to be right there was exciting. And so, and I had been up and I had seen them play. And so it was, that was a really, really big thing for me. And so glad to join and be a part of that afterwards.
So how does a guy such as yourself, and I know you got to be a really, really smart guy to be in the Ivy League first and foremost, you're still in the top 20 in points. Yet I look back at the years that you were there, you guys had averaged somewhere between 57, and I think you actually one year got over 60 points. How do you do that in that offense?
Well, that's a great question. That's a great question. It's funny, when we would practice, we didn't necessarily, the strategy wasn't to slow the game down, ever. Now, maybe when you play Georgetown or Carolina or somebody like that, you're obviously going to be, pretty selective in your shots. But we really moved the ball nicely and played at a nice pace and clip. But yeah, believe it or not, a lot of teams would hold the ball against us, because we had probably more talent than most teams. So that combination of when we were playing big time teams, we were making sure we were selective, and when we were playing in our league, the other teams were being selective. But those are low scoring games, a little bit longer shot clock, 45 seconds, and probably very efficient. Maybe 60 points, but very efficient 60 points.
Well, I know you put the fear of God in Arkansas and in Syracuse, a couple of times in the NCAA tournament as well. But, the question I really want to ask you was, how much did a legendary coach in Pete Carrell, how much does that mean? How much did he mean to you, first and foremost, as a coach and then as a friend?
Yeah, obviously he had an incredible impact on me. He recruited me out of high school. And, I developed a good relationship with him. And when I went to school there, he's a really, really difficult, demanding coach to play for. And he was so exacting and demanding. And, he always saw basketball, or evaluated your basketball production or abilities through your character, or he saw it as a character flaw if you couldn't do something well, and maybe a positive character trait if you could do something well. So, and that was with everything. And so he was so demanding, and it was somebody that I had trouble sleeping at night, especially early on, just trying to make sure that I could do better in his eyes. And I always wanted to coach. And so it was great for me to play for someone who would eventually be in the Hall of Fame. And then he helped me get a job as a high school coach, and came to games when I was a college coach, something I was really proud of. I think that, before I was there, I don't think many Princeton players went into coaching. And so I feel like he had I had a soft spot in his heart because I wanted to go into coaching, and eventually did. So yeah, he meant the world to me, and I'm sure if I hadn't made that decision to go to Princeton and play for him, I think things would be a lot different.
So right now, if you were to call a play, let's go 10 seconds left to go in the game, and you got a chance to win it. Do you have that Princeton offense, that pick down, that backdoor cut in the playbook now?
Yeah, we sure do. And actually, I would rather Coach Carrill not be calling it, because I don't think that he might have been focused on the previous play's mistake a little bit more than the next play. So, but yeah, we have some things that we want to go to, and some things that are always important to us and how we play.
Coach, I want to ask you, I didn't realize that, I guess Beaver is now Arcadia University, but you mentioned D3. We talked a lot of D3 coaches on here. I know it's, 20 years ago or maybe more than that, but what was the major difference that you see from the D3 athlete to D1? Is it just length, or is it more, are they quicker? What have you seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Size would be the biggest thing. We had some very good players at Division III. And I saw some very good players at Division III. One of my players at Lansdale Catholic named Alex Kraft went to Franklin and Marshall, was a Division III All-American, and went to the Final Four. He certainly could have played Division I basketball. He's probably 6'4", and had he been 6'6", he's a Division I player. He'd have been 6'8", he's a high major Division I player. So I think size is the very first thing. If you have a big guy in Division III, he could become a great player, but he's probably a little bit more limited when he comes out. The second thing would be, the overall speed and quickness of the players. In Division III, your quickest guys, as in Division I, your guards, your point guards are going to be quick. But at Division I, you're going to have guys who are 6'7" with an incredibly quick first step. And then I think after that, I think it's fairly even. I don't think the shooting is any better or worse. I don't think the fundamentals are necessarily any better or worse. It's just that Division I, you spend a whole lot more time. We provide for the guy to be here in the summer for 8 weeks. You have dedicated strength coach, assistant strength coach, trainer, huge staff, academic support. You travel by charter airplane. Everything is done so that the players can have that much more time to develop. So, I think the size and the quickness is the biggest thing. And then after that, I think it's fairly even, except Division I. The expectation and how much they work at basketball is much higher.
Coach, I'm going to date myself again, okay? I apologize for this, but kind of going back, just because it resonates with me, I don't even know if the guys, the boys, I guess you've kind of figured out it's daddy and sons, I guess. But at the same time, we're from Southern Virginia, Danville. I don't know how much familiarity you have with Danville, but there is a Richmond alumnus that once upon a time went to a school called George Washington High School. He was a 6'7", lengthy black kid from Danville. Went on to be a Richmond Spider, happened to be a part of a 84 or 85 NC upset of Charles Barkley and the Auburn Tigers. And I was listening to XM radio the other day, and he just so happened to have a spot on Chris Childer's spot the other day, and I kind of joined in. I hadn't talked to Johnny in a long time, but do you have any kind of relationship with Johnny Newman and, or I guess with any of the alumnus of the past?
Sure. Yeah. Johnny has been, obviously the best player Richmond's had, and just an incredible NBA career. He spends some time in Richmond. I think not as much as he used to. But yeah, he's been a great friend to the program. We lost a guy named Greg Beckwith, who was part of those teams with Johnny in the early 80s. And Greg later became the color commentator on the radio broadcast. And so we were very close. He and Johnny were very close. So yeah, Johnny has traveled with us to games. He's been part of Richmond basketball. Obviously, his number flies in the banners, and he's somebody that everybody aspires to be, and certainly have the career that he had.
Well, he was silky smooth, Johnny, in high school, and then he just got more aggressive. I watched I guess I call it the evolution process, and then he gets to Richmond, and then I don't know if you know this, and maybe you do, he became jumping, jamming Johnny Newman then. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Well, that fits, I guess. Yeah, for sure.
Coach, I'm just curious about your coaching career. You spent 5 seasons at Air Force. I think 4 as an assistant, 1 as the head coach there. I'm just curious, what is it like coaching at a service, military academy? As far as like the recruits you can have, I'm sure they have things that they have to do for their military experience as well. So what's it like just coaching at a school like that?
Yeah, well, one, it's really a cool and it's an honor to be part of the service academy, the day-to-day life. I mean, the people that you meet, of course, the cadets or the student athletes, but the people in the administration, so many of them are alums or certainly have served or are still active duty. So that's really an honor to be there and to walk those halls and interact with those people. The mission is incredible, and it's very clear that you're trying to build these guys to serve the country. So I would say that was just outstanding. I think that from a recruiting basketball players, it's a challenge because the culture of high school basketball and grassroots basketball is pretty different than the mission of the United States Air Force Academy. And so, the guys have to come in, they have to, the application process is rigorous. Academically, it's very challenging. They're in the military while they're at school there. So they're marching to lunch. They have duties that they need to perform. They go to basic training before freshman year, and then they commit to being in the Air Force for 5 years. So those challenges for a basketball recruit seem overwhelming. Now, they're all playing in a high-level conference in the Mountain West. And when we were there, it was Utah, BYU, San Diego State, Wyoming, New Mexico. It was a really, really high-level conference. And still is. So you have to try to attract guys who are, one, interested, who can qualify to get into the academy, who are willing to do that and be there. And so you're working with some really special young men. And as I said, it's gotten even more difficult there because of the transferring. They can't take transfers in. They certainly can lose transfers. So, but it was an honor to be there, and something I was really proud of to be part of every day, and still I'm proud that I was there.
Coach, these boys are trembling right now because first and foremost, you're the biggest interview we've pretty much had on this podcast. So I just want to thank you very much for that, first and foremost.
No problem.
But
no problem.
the other thing is, I think they forewarned you. I'm the controversial one. So
All right.
I apologize right off the get-go. So, I think the easy question here is, what has changed from start to where you're at now? But I think the best way I know how to do this is, how does NIL, and sometimes I think it's a beautiful word, and sometimes I feel like it's the most ugly word that there is, but how has that changed your life as far as grooming a basketball team? And like I said, when we first started this, I noticed that you had a very good week this week, or last couple of weeks, bringing in some kids. The question that I'm getting around to is the high school senior important to you anymore on the Division I level? And the reason why I asked this is, I've told these kids, I think I got my feelings hurt a little bit because I took it upon myself to kind of help a couple kids that were all-state in basketball and tried to, I don't want to say shop, but I tried to get them some notoriety on the Division I level, because I personally feel that they can play basketball on that level. And for some reason, I was very unsuccessful with the Division I schools in Virginia. And I could name everybody, but I don't want to do that. That's not the purpose of this question. But how important is that senior? And how can we, as people, as podcasters, as whatever, how can we bring that person to your notoriety, or for you to notice them? How can we get that person in front of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that, number one, the high school players are still important at Richmond. I think we have 4 freshmen this year. We had 4 last year. So for us, we're still going to try to hold on and build our program with guys who are here for 4 and 5 years. That's really what we're trying to do. You can't do it exclusively at this point, because you can't replace a departing sophomore or junior with a freshman over and over and over again. You'll just be too young. That's what we'd like to have, as guys who enroll at school as a freshman and graduate from Richmond. The second thing is that even at Richmond, the high school guy isn't quite as valuable, because you're going to be putting a lot of your resources, and which now is really resources, money, to guys who are transfers, because they've already proven themselves at the college level, and they have they can demand a lot more in the market than a high school player. And so if you see somebody who averaged 12 points a game at a mid-major college basketball conference, well, there are a lot of questions answered there that you don't have to project quite as much. I would say that, yeah, I think it's more difficult. We have more scholarships now. There are 15 as opposed to 13. We've always redshirted guys and continue to redshirt guys during this time. It equals the playing field a little bit. I think a high school player being willing to redshirt or being open to that discussion is probably important. And I think probably having a different understanding of what the timeline might be. So whereas before, when I was recruited, many years ago, you would have a bunch of home visits in the fall, make your visits late fall, and then make your decision in the spring, outside of the top 25 guys. That has changed a couple of different times. And for a while there, you had, maybe 75 players committing before their senior year, or 150 players committing. Now it's very different. I think if you're not in the top 50, 100 players in the country, colleges aren't going to be as quick to offer you a spot, because they want to see what happens with their roster. So not only are they anticipating taking transfers, they're also concerned and anticipating losing current players that they don't want to replace with a freshman. So I think having a different understanding of the timeline, that if you don't have as many offers as you'd like in September of your senior year, that's probably the new normal. And being open to choosing a college in April, May, June, July, because that's when the colleges may come back around to say, hey, we need some players. We've always liked this guy. Now let's see if we can find out more about him.
So I'm going to ask you an ignorant question, because it's pure ignorance on my part. 1 through 15 now, I was going to say 1 through 13. Do all players, I don't know, get a piece of that pie, that NIL pie? And then B question would be, can I call Chris Mooney and say, hey, I got Joe Smith in the wings who needs a place to live, who needs a place to play basketball? Can we do that now?
For sure. So I would say 1 through 15, everybody can do it differently. So they'll all be on scholarship for the most part. But, some schools might divvy the money up through 15 guys. Some schools might, really have the top 5 or the starting 5 make the lion's share of that money. Secondly, yeah, I think that's still how recruiting works, where guys call and say, hey, I really think this guy is somebody who's valuable to see. He's going to be playing here and here in June and here in July. That's still how recruiting works to a certain degree, especially at the high school level.
Well, I know they got a couple extra questions, but see, I told you boys that I would be nice and I would do that very professionally. So I tried anyway.
Well, Coach, I wanted to ask, and Greg, might have to cut this out as a coach if you just don't want to comment on it. But one of the things right now that's going around, and Nick Saban was commenting on it yesterday or 2 days ago, the Protect College Sports Act. I mean, have you had a chance to be able to look at that stuff, and if you had any opinions on it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really tricky right now. What has happened is that it's gone from a system where I think it was heavily weighted in the college's favor, even though, what's a little bit misconstrued is a player could always transfer and still receive a scholarship at his next school. He just didn't play that year. And whether that's fair or not isn't for me to decide, but they weren't really like restricted as it's maybe pointed out, but it was in the college's favor for sure. And now it's gone to 100% in the player's favor. So, this idea that it's name, image, and likeness is, not the right word. It's not that at all. It's pay for play. This idea that the portal opens and closes is wrong. I mean, the players can, opt to go in the portal at any time. So they're essentially free agents every day, where the school has to continue to hold their scholarship spot, pay for their room and board, pay them their NIL. So, and they're free to move at any point. And so I think that, there are no guardrails or rules, and the rules, you have many more advantages as a college athlete now than you would as an NBA player or NFL player. Those players sign contracts that have weight on both sides and have responsibilities on both sides. Right now, the only responsibilities are for the school. So I think just for the good of competition and fairness, that doesn't mean the salaries will go down or up or anything, but that has to probably change where there's more weight given to the schools. So I hope we do something. I think that this is unsustainable. I saw Coach Saban talk about how much the inflation has gone and acquiring players. And in reality, the market's being set by agents who aren't licensed or authorized or anything like that. And the demand is so high to have a good football team or good basketball team that people are willing to pay the money. So there needs to be something that evens it out to a certain degree, and that there is leverage on both sides. If you were going to buy a house, they wouldn't say, well, we only protect the seller, not the buyer. And right now there are no rules that protect the programs or the schools. And hopefully we can get to that, whether that's through this act or through, something else or another way or dialogue, but hopefully we can get to something where there are some guidelines and rules.
And then, I feel like NIL itself has kind of gotten mucky. I think in the beginning, it kind of started with, the idea that players were going to get deals based on, doing commercials or true NIL. I mean, now you talk about like rev sharing and all that stuff. Could you just explain, I mean, is the money coming from like alumni? Is it coming from companies? Is it coming from the school itself? I mean, how does that process work now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's probably different, if you talk to 100 schools, it's probably a little bit different at each 100 schools. So yeah, the idea was that the schools couldn't pay directly at first, and you had this name, image, and likeness. That lasted about a day because, as popular as some athletes are, even a starter on a Division I basketball team, nobody really knows who that guy is, or not enough to have him sell cars to real people. And so they started to form these collectives, which was basically, the collective was a bank where the funds were managed by someone and raised the money from donors. Then after the house settlement, the schools were now allowed to pay directly to players. So I would say that the money is probably mostly coming from the combination of donors to the school, and then that money redistributed to the players. And depending on what school where you are, having the money that is generated from athletics be able to pay for it. So your concessions, season ticket sales, those kinds of things. But that's gonna vary greatly even within conference, and there's gonna be a big difference between Alabama and Vanderbilt. There's gonna be a big difference between Penn State and Northwestern. So let alone when you start to go down conferences that are really, really different, like the Atlantic 10. So somehow schools are making it happen. It seems to be unsustainable, but so far it has not only been sustainable, but it has just gone up dramatically each year.
Coach, just to piggyback off of what Devin just said, I guess the only way I know how to ask this is just how stressful do these things add to the life of a head coach? I mean, I know we lose people like Nick Saban in football. We lose people like Mike Krzyzewski. We lose people like Roy Williams. And to my surprise, Tony Bennett. Does this stuff contribute to all of this?
Yeah, for sure. I think, Thad Matta just retired, the coach of Butler who had been at Ohio State. These guys are tremendous energy and I think it's just 180 degrees different of what would have caused guys to get into coaching when they did. A lot of guys start out high school coaching. I coached both high school and Division III. And again, that's not about players making money or not. It's just that it's so different to have to negotiate with players, for them to be a free agent every day, for them to be recruited all the time while you're coaching. Naturally, it creates this a different dynamic and a different personality of the players and a different force of how things are going. So, I think it puts a tremendous amount of stress on it, and it puts stress on the universities. It puts stress on the donors. We're starting to see some of the other sports, maybe not survive the Olympic sports. And so again, it's not for me to decide what's right or wrong, but I think that we're in a time now where, there are going to be more and more cuts made for the benefit of, football and basketball players. And whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing will be debated. But I think the change is significant, and I think it's just the opposite of why some of those coaches got into it in the beginning.
Coach, I know we're beating a dead horse here, but I'll ask one last thing and I'll get off the subject. But, some of the universities around have, I guess, hired people I guess you want to call them general managers to take the stress off of coaches. Is that something the University of Richmond has done?
So we do. We have a general manager, but not in-house. We basically contract a general manager, and he serves as the general manager for probably 6 to 8 programs. And so, when it gets down to the contracts and the language and all of those things, that would really be hard. I think that probably the coaches still do the vast majority of the negotiating, certainly the finding players, identifying players, recruiting players. But I think in terms of the business relationship, we turn that over to the general manager.
Coach, I'm getting out of the weeds like these guys. I'm going to talk some Richmond basketball. Go back to 2011. We know about the Sweet 16 run there, but I'm talking about that first game you guys played Vanderbilt, get the win by 3. When you're there in, I think it was Denver, you're watching Louisville and Morehead State. I mean, did you think after that win, you're like, hey, we're playing Louisville for sure. Let's watch more of them. Or when you're watching those games, the next games after you make sure you watch both teams in case there's an upset, and then how happy were you guys to get Morehead State that next game?
Yeah, it's interesting because the Morehead game was right before ours, so we were in the locker room and they made a shot with about a second to go, and the arena erupted. So Louisville was a good team, of course, but overachieved that year, and Morehead had an NBA player and a guy who lasted in the NBA for it named Kenneth Fareed. So they were really good and talented. But I will say this, you have one assistant prepare for one team and the other assistant, and naturally you kind of, assume without thinking about it that Louisville will win. But when we went back to the hotel after beating Vanderbilt and we watched the Morehead game, they were a team that pressed. They played a little bit of a unique style defense, but was really predicated upon pressing. And I can remember watching the first game and a half, and I went into the other room and I was like, it'd be really difficult for Morehead to beat Richmond because they were a team who really lived off turnovers. And in the Vanderbilt game, we had 3 turnovers. I think it was an NCAA record. And so we really didn't turn the ball over very much at all. And I thought, boy, it'd really be difficult for Morehead to beat Richmond. So I just remember trying to, compose myself and make sure we had the game plan going. But, Fareed was a great player, but a tremendous defensive player and rebounder. And then I think we only had 5 or 6 turnovers in the game and were able to win that game a little bit going away.
I think one of the interesting perspectives was just seeing 2, Richmond area teams, not only Virginia, but 2 Richmond area teams in that Sweet 16 Elite 8 there in San Antonio with VCU. I mean, how much can VCU credit you for playing Kansas first and maybe giving them some pointers after that game?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything yet about that, but Kansas had 7 NBA players on that team, and I can remember as you're watching what's really important in a game like that is that they're athletically superior speed, size, all those things. And we had a great team. We had a great team. But it's really going to be hard if they shoot well from three. And I think they started the game 7 of their first 9 from three. And that's going to make it difficult. And I think in the next game against VCU, I think they were like 3 for 20. And so, now that's your defense and VCU's defense. But that was really difficult because they shot the ball well from three. Then all of a sudden you feel like, it's really difficult to guard them because of the size they have and the speed they have. So, but yeah, that was great to be down there. Mike Rhodes, who later became the head coach, he and I were friends and close. And I remember us talking, kind of as you're doing the public practices. That was an exciting time and certainly something we have great memories of.
When you've coached for however long you have, over 20 years, how much do you cherish those rounds where you make it to the Sweet 16 or you make it to the NCAA tournament versus those years where you don't make it or it's not a year that you wanted or something like that?
Yeah, I mean that's the nature of sports. There aren't that many teams that obviously Duke and Michigan State, teams that really are at a level where they're going to be, even if they don't have one of their best teams, they're going to be a team that does that. And how do you consistently build and strive to be the best you can? I think that we've had a certain plan, and then it's very, very disrupted by the new way of doing things in the NIL. And so then we all become a little bit more fundraisers and salesmen in terms of trying to build the program that way. But you have to adjust and adapt. And the most important thing for us is to recruit really good players. At Richmond, I think it's, we have a high priority on the standard we have for the players off the court in the classroom. But we still want to have the best players we possibly can and go out and compete. So you cherish those times when you can have great wins, great seasons, and you certainly don't want to go through a season that where you struggle. But you have to learn things from that and adapt from that and continue to move forward and try to do the best you can.
Coach, on Selection Sunday, why do coaches sit there and just tremor and just ball up in the fetal position when they notify them that they have to play a A10 team?
Well, I think, the A10 has done great over the course of time. Temple and Xavier were in our league for a long time, and UMass made a Final Four. Temple made, maybe 4 or 5 Elite Eights. St. Joe's was the number 1 team in the country in 2004. The main reason is, and this is a challenge for us in the new era, is the A10 has always had great players. It's a basketball first conference that, there's no football affiliation. So all these schools are investing, so much money and manpower and resources to their basketball program. And that pays off because that's going to mean you have players who are at Atlantic 10 schools who could play at any level. Now it's difficult for us to hold on to our players, as it is for everybody, but it's difficult for us to hold on to our players because if you achieve great things at the A10, you're probably wanted in the ACC or the SEC. And so, but there's still really good basketball. And I think that our what we've done in the last 5-6 years in the NCAA tournament is still strong, and we're still moving in a great direction. We just need more and more opportunities to get more teams in there so that we can continue to improve and prove how great the conference is.
Coach, continuing on that NCAA tournament, bid system, maybe not the A10 so much, but other conferences have talked about, hey, let's just send our regular season champion to the NCAA tournament instead of doing that conference tournament where you may see an upset, in that semifinal game or even the championship game where that number 1 team doesn't go there. And I don't know if that correlates with how many upsets we've seen in the NCAA tournament since then or the last few years, if that's happened or not. But I just want your thoughts on the regular season champion versus the conference tournament champion.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, years ago the Big Ten, the Pac-10, the Ivy League would have their regular season champ. They didn't have a tournament. And that's probably a better indicator of who your best team is, to have gone through, 4 months and been able to win the championship. Now, the hard part about that now is the conferences are so big that the schedules are very unbalanced. And so in our league, for example, we'll play 5 teams twice, but we'll play the majority of the teams only once. And so then how much of an advantage is it if you played them at home versus a disadvantage of playing them on the road? And should that game count quite as much because you had a road win, or should it count for more? And so with the conferences being so big, it's really hard to declare a regular season champion that should go to and provide and represent the team in the postseason. But the next thing is, the tournaments are great and fun and exciting. And in our neck of the woods, the ACC tournament is so wonderful, and the A10 tournament's fun and exciting. But yeah, the likelihood of having the team that's the regular season champ hold on and win the conference tournament, that's a tall order. So I really would love to see if it was both, to be honest with you. I'd love to see smaller conferences. These are things that are not going to happen, but I'd love to see smaller conferences where you do play a true round robin and play everybody twice. And I think for now, the conference tournament champion is, as not totally equitable as that is, because you should earn a little bit more if you're the conference regular season champion. It's probably the best way to go because of the unbalanced schedule during the season.
Coach, I know they're increasing the number of bids to the NCAA tournament now. I forgot what the number is now. I know it went from 68 to whatever they're thinking now. But a lot of people say, hey, that's gonna water down the NCAA tournament. But for me as a fan, I'm like, well, that's more good games we get to watch on TV. So I just want to get your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, well, I was really for expansion. I think that the last time they expanded was in 1985, and it went 48 to 64, and or significant expansion. And then we have 100 more teams in Division One, so you would think that expansion, football bowl games, college baseball, women's college basketball, college soccer, the World Cup, the NFL playoffs, they've all expanded in that time. And so basketball really hadn't. That's one thought. And then the second thought is that, in just a short time, we've had 68 teams. 2 of the first 4 teams went to the Final Four, VCU in 2011 and UCLA during the COVID NCAA tournament. And, I went back and researched. Those teams lost their last 4 conference games. UCLA lost the last 4 Pac-12 games. VCU lost the last 4 CAA games. So that doesn't mean they had momentum going into the tournament. That just probably demonstrates how much parity there is. So if 2 teams can stumble into the NCAA tournament, having lost their last 4 regular season conference games, and make the Final Four, it just shows how much parity there is. So that, expanding the tournament, I don't think waters it down. And I'm pretty sure we'll have a team, go to the Elite Eight or the Final Four that is in one of those new 8 spots. So, I hope it doesn't just go to below 500 high major teams. I hope those bids don't just go there, because I think part of the beauty of the NCAA tournament is seeing these games versus lower conference teams or mid-major teams. And I hope that we get that. But I think expansion in general, I think is a positive thing, because I think there are plenty of teams who can win and can compete. And selecting a field is really difficult when you have, Arkansas might play 22 quad 1 games and, Princeton might play 1. And so it's hard to compare those 2 teams. And so I think the more teams that you let in probably gets to be a little bit more fair.
But I agree with you. I think the A10 and Mountain West always deserve, a few more spots in there. I think you guys play, great basketball. Last one for me. Let's say somebody have never watched Richmond basketball. What is a Chris Mooney coached basketball team?
Yeah, well, I would say that, one thing that's important here is the way we play. And I think that is probably fairly evident right away in terms of we play very much team basketball, where there's an emphasis on moving the ball, on everybody being skilled, on everybody knowing how to play. And so I think that playing together is something that we emphasize the most, and playing team basketball, both offensively and defensively. So I would say that that's by far the thing we emphasize the most. And because of that, I hope it's the thing that's by far seen the most and recognized the most.
Coach, I'm going to piggyback off that just a hair. And I'm not even going to pretend like I know what a contract is all about. Never really signed one. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, that 26, 27 is a big year for you. And, what I was going to ask was, let's just say 26, 27, you just say, I'm retiring. What would you want to be known for, or how would you like Chris Mooney to be known for as a coach or a person, as a matter of fact?
Yeah, to be honest, in this day and age, I feel like 26, 27 is important for every single coach there is. I would say, just that I cared about the players and cared about Richmond. We found a home in Richmond and love it, and have tried to do everything we can to represent the school in the best possible way, and to put together teams that can compete nationally every year. And so that would be the main thing, that I truly love Richmond and truly cared about the players.
Coach, I know this is not CBS. I know it's not ESPN, and I know it's not whatever CBS Network, NBC, anything like that. So if I ever asked you, Coach Mooney, is there a job out there? Is there a dream job? Maybe this is the dream job, but if there was something that could ever take you away from Richmond basketball, what would it be?
Yeah, again, I think years ago I could have given you a list of 40 places and ranked them in order. I think right now, because we've been here so long, and it's really long in this era of college athletics, being at Richmond is means everything to me, and us being good and winning games and helping our other programs succeed because basketball gets a lot of recognition. Those things are really important to me, and just continuing to compete and win and doing it a certain way that Richmond's always proud of.
All right, Coach, I'm not bashful whatsoever. We've been talking for 45 minutes. I'm sure you're well aware of that by now. But I just want to let you know that, in these 45 minutes, I know I've never met you in person. So I can tell you that I think the integrity and I can see the optimism in you. And I think Richmond should be very, very proud to have you as their head coach. And not only that, but scratch my back, I scratch yours. We would love to build a bigger relationship with Richmond athletics, especially with the basketball team. So I'm not going to be afraid to ask you if there's sometime, I don't care what game it is, can we get in and maybe do a day game or day in the life of Chris Mooney, something to that effect, or follow a player for a day.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd love to have you all, for sure.
Thank you.
All right. I think we've taken up enough of your time, Coach. I know you have things to do. I know the portal, NIL, all that good, fun stuff you got to do during the off season. Coach, we can't thank you enough for coming on here and talking with us. It's been a great interview. Coach Chris Mooney, the Richmond Spiders. Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate being here.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you, Coach.